Okie dokie. Let's start the stream and then tilt down so that your head doesn't have 3 miles of headroom. More tilt down, more tilt down. See, the more of your chest we see, the less we'll see of all the
more
crap
beam
in the
tilt
background.
on that camera.
So can you crop me down some?
I don't know. Can you tilt down further? You're still like a little bitty head at the bottom of the screen.
Is that better?
That's getting better. And now Suncast can fix you up a little bit.
That looks good right here.
Suncast is the man. All right. Stream is live, so we'll keep our happy chit chat here while we there we go. There's the stream. We'll like and share. All righty, that's shared a little bit. Let's share it some more. Hey, everybody on the stream. Glad you've joined us. We are getting ready to do This Week in Radio Tech. We just got to get the stream all out there. There we go. And we'll share it to one more place here in a second. Chris, I didn't get to ask, how's your day? Oh, it's 4 o'clock. 5 o'clock here. Good gosh. Don't even have time for chit chat.
No chit chat today.
I'm sorry. Poor planning on my part. And let's put Matt Levin's name here. We'll tag Matt. And we'll tag Chris Tarr. And boom. Okay, that's about taken care of. Come on, post. Let's go. There we go. All right, good. It's time for episode number 697. Hey, if you're watching us on the live stream, glad to have you with us. We are just about to start the show, and I'm excited. We have a couple of interesting topics today that I want to know more about. I know a little bit about, but it wouldn't take me but 3 minutes to tell everything I know about it. So we're gonna hear from a couple experts here. All right, let's start This Week in Radio Tech, and I want to get my little torch sign in the shot there a little bit more. Come on, get over here. There we go. All right, here we go with TWiRT 697. We'll start the show in 3, 2. Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech, the show where we talk about everything from the microphone to that light bulb at the top of the tower. I'm Kirk Harnack. It's episode 697. Wow, we're almost at 700. Delighted to have you along, and I'm just glad to be here and do this show about every Thursday. I'm in the Telos Alliance studio in Nashville, Tennessee, back home after a lot of travel, and going to be here for a while. So I'm glad to have the travel, but also it's nice to sleep in your own bed. You know what I mean? Hey, it's we had a terribly rainy, thunderous day here in Nashville yesterday, but it's much nicer today. The birds are out. The sun's been out a good part of the day, and it's just glorious. 79 degrees outside, and that's my weather report. Let's head up to Mukwonago, Wisconsin, where Chris Tarr, yay, is here.
Yay.
Hey, Chris, good to see you.
Good to see you. It's 79 here as well, so that's good. We had a couple of storms and tornadoes roll through. I was busy the other night, but fortunately didn't lose too much. So, weather like this, you realize, okay, what's grounded and not grounded. We find out really quickly. But other than that, good to be here on this nice, beautiful day. And it's actually, I'm in my messy office today. You can't really see it, but I've got in my office here, which is the basement of the house, I've got this sleeper sofa. And for some reason, my youngest daughter has decided that she wants to sleep down here and not in her room. So she's been making a mess.
Where's the dog? Don't you normally have a dog?
My dog passed away about 2 or 3 months ago. I know, Louis, poor guy. I mean, it was sad, but he was elderly. I mean, he was arthritic and deaf, and I think he was 15. So,
wow.
So yeah, no, I don't have my coworker here. I've got my other coworker, which is the cat, but he's not nearly as nice. He's a cat. He hates everybody. So.
Well, I'm sorry if I knew and didn't realize about your dog passing.
Oh,
I'm
that's
sorry
right.
to hear that.
That's all right. Like I said, he would, he had a good long life, and it was old age, so it wasn't even that. We knew it was coming.
All right. Well, let's head out to wherever Matt Levin is. Our guest is Matt Levin. I think he's in Ohio somewhere, an undisclosed location. Where in the world is Matt Levin in Ohio? Hey, Matt. Good to see you.
I am at home in Ohio, actually, about 45 minutes southeast of Columbus.
Oh wow. Okay. And you've been on the show several times before, and your email address is still a River Radio. What do you spend your time doing these days?
Well, I do still work full-time for the River in Columbus, taking care of those stations. In fact, we just added one up in Worcester, Ohio. I'm getting that all up on the air and running with our product. But I also do a lot of consulting for a couple other big radio groups, Christian radio groups, and then I do some stuff for Josh, as you know, at various facilities that Josh supports.
Josh Bone. Okay. So you
Yep.
are somehow connected with his Max Connect and group, and which I guess now the Triple Helix name comes to mind with several things together.
Mm-hmm.
Good,
absolutely.
Good.
Yep.
Okay. Well, in fact, I'm going to ask you a favor. After you give us all this information that we're going to talk about today, it's like a free consulting session, kids, so pay attention. When it's time for the Max Connect commercial later in the show, I'd love to have you talk about some of the things that you're doing with Max Connect that people, station owners, station engineers might be interested in having you do for them. So would you help us out with the Max Connect ad?
I sure can.
Good. All right. Hey, we're going to take an ad right now real quick and remind you about Nautel and this cool promotion that Nautel has. They've got at Nautel, they've introduced this GV2 FM transmitter. It's pretty amazing because it's got live wire AOIP inputs for all the audio streams. It has Omnia for Nautel audio processing for FM and up to 4 HDs, blend lock FM HD synchronization, and that eliminates HD radio time alignment drift. Totally gone, and so it stays locked. Gen 4 V-Porter software-based importer and exporter, Gen 4 X-Gen modulator, and station logo, album art, artist experience, all that's included. But what they also have for you is the new HD digital radio test drive. It helps broadcasters break down the barriers that many stations have had from trying HD radio, largely money. HD radio transmission has the potential to create critical presence on the car dashboard and help stations stay competitive in the field of alternative media choices. So it's based on Nautel's software-based AirChain technology. HD Radio Test Drive allows broadcasters to put it on trial on your station, HD radio transmission in your market for up to 6 months to unlock listeners and content and new revenue potential without needing to install and purchase $40,000 or $50,000 worth of HD gear. You can learn more on the Nautel website. You can click on the GV2 and the HD Digital Radio Test Drive. A lot of cool things that work together to make this happen. And largely, it's because it's largely software based inside the GV2 transmitter. You plug literally live wire into it to deliver some audio, several channels of audio. It does the processing for you. It does all the what's it called? The metadata that shows up on your radio.
PSD.
I'm doing this. Thank you. PSD? PAD? PSD?
Yes. PSD.
We didn't do the test drive, but I'm doing a HD radio in Oxford, Mississippi. Sadly, we didn't have enough money to buy a GV2, so we're using an older Nautel transmitter with the multicast and the new FM HD exciter. And we got album art on the air. It's just as cool as can be. I really love it.
It's amazing how that all has changed over the years. And I was looking back because this past weekend, I was at our lacrosse facility rebuilding a bunch of racks in the transfer building, and that's an HD station, but it uses older HD gear. And I was thinking back to 2005 when I put my first HD station on there, all the equipment that it required. And then, you get up to, I have a what is it, the GVN series, and that's now importer exporter in one box. And and now all this stuff's built in. It's just amazing, how that has progressed and how much easier it got. I was trying to program this this older system that I have in lacrosse, which is a separate importer, exporter, separate XGen, and it took me an hour to get it configured. And I'm like, God, it's been so long since I've had to do all of these boxes. I'm so used to these newer ones now where you can just log in and everything's pretty well set up. But that's a great feature. I can't wait to get my hands on one of those.
Yeah, it is cool. Thanks, Chris. And you can find out more at nautel.com. Just go there and click on the GV2 and the HD radio test drive. You'll find out more about it. Love it. All right. Hey, Matt Levin is our guest. And Matt, we're going to pick your brain on something that we kind of all knew was going to happen as technology rolls along and more people adopt audio over IP. And Matt, you've been early in audio over IP. I guess I first met you having to do with audio processing because you've always held yourself out as a consultant for that. You're very good at it. You got a great ear. You know how to adjust numbers of different processors out there. You're kind of closely associated with the folks at Timeo, and can't go wrong there. But I want to talk about this notion of audio over IP and stations that may start with one brand or standard and switch to another. And when I heard about a project that you've been involved in recently, it reminded me of something right here in Nashville, where a station started out with one brand, and then they got a different engineer who didn't like that brand, and he switched them to another brand. And then they got a different engineer, and they switched back to the first brand. And it was all audio over IP. So, talk to me about there's going to be more of this happening, and tell me about your project and your experience, Matt.
Well, yeah, I just got done doing that very thing, switching it back to the original brand of Axia at a facility out west, which I will not name. But they started out very early in Axia, just like our station did in Columbus with the old Elements, fanned engines. In fact, they still had some of that stuff sitting around where it had been removed. Some of it had been sold, some of it was still sitting on shelves. And they went with a different brand, and the company, it got sold to a company who I do engineering work for, and they standardize across the board with all Axia IQ consoles and wide orbit automation. So they bought it, and of course it was, the engineer that was there at the time actually knew Axia better because he wasn't the engineer that put the different brand in. So he wasn't super familiar with this brand either, and we needed to do a bunch of reprogramming, and it was kind of a struggle because none of us really knew it, and it was very old anyways. Started to have some minor problems here and there, so the decision was made to, hey, you know what, we're just going to put Axia back in because that's what we standardize with across our company anyways. So I just spent the week out there putting all Axia consoles in place where it was a different brand and different type of IP driver. And so there was that. We had to switch all the computers out back to Axia drivers and get switches back in that were the right configuration for Axia, and reprogram everything and reset up all the consoles again.
Wow. So I heard a lot in there of the word familiarity. And for example, if I were a production person doing imaging or production for a station, and I was really accustomed to Adobe Audition, and I got a job at a station that was using something else, I would really insist on Adobe Audition. I don't want to learn something else. I'm good and quick and fast with Adobe Audition. In fact, I know a guy who's been in radio forever, and he loves Cool Edit Pro and doesn't want to learn anything else. And he's fast with it, and it does everything he needs. So at what point does the heavy weight of familiarity with a brand, with a way of doing things, whether it's Axia or Wheatstone or SAS or Logitech, at what point does the Lavo, at what point does the weight of that, the engineer knows how to make that walk and talk already, does that get outweighed by the cost of changing to something else? What are the factors involved in a station making a decision to say, we're going to scrap the stuff that money was spent on in the last few years and go with another brand because we're more familiar with it? What about that equation?
Well, I think it goes beyond just the engineer that has to maintain it. I mean, that's a big part of it, but it also goes to the talent and what the talent's used to. Along the lines of what you just gave an example of, I know guys that love Vox Pro, and just they're so much faster with Vox Pro for editing. And even though, I've got an example of a guy I'm working with who he does all of his production in Vox Pro, even though he has to then get it into White Orbit somehow, which in Adobe, you can do all the metadata tagging right there in Audition, but you can't do that in Vox Pro. So he's faster actually at doing the production in Vox Pro and then putting it into White Orbit than it would be to just do it all natively in Adobe. And that's that talent comfort level. What are you more comfortable with? What are you faster in? What makes your job easier? And it's quite frankly our job as engineers to give the talent the tools that they know how to use and are comfortable with, and they can do their job the easiest with. And some of that does come down to cost and what the company is standardized with, but it also, you have to make it easy to use for your talent. Another example, this same company they standardized with the Axia IQ consoles. One of the things I do is create an air profile and a VT profile, again, to make it easier for them so they don't accidentally put a mic on the air when they're voice tracking or doing production off air. So, I've said this many a times, I think probably even on your show, our jobs as engineers is part technical, but it's part customer service. We are there to make the job of the talent and everybody else easier, and not so that they're not frustrated and having problems all the time. So we're as much customer service as we are technology.
I want to come back in a minute, Matt, to you and talk about. You said you changed out some Ethernet switches. I want to know some more technical details, but let me ask Chris Tarr. Chris, have you been called upon to change from one AOIP system to a different brand?
Yes, I have.
And what drove that, and what was the reaction?
I part of it was just simply there were some features that one had that the other didn't, that they really wanted, and they fortunately hadn't gone too far down the rabbit hole into the switch where it was too difficult to undo. And I think that is also obviously, I've been saying, forever that, we're the people who enable creative people to do what they do. But there is a point to where it's also the right tool for the job. There are some stations I have warbands on. There are some stations I have Omnias on. There are some stations, I don't look at one brand as being, the one that, the one that has to be used in every case. Now, there are some things where that makes sense, but there are some situations where perhaps, it doesn't make sense to do everything. Now, something like audio over IP, there's a consistency there, and that really, there's a lot of reasons to stick with something like that. But when it comes to processors or transmitters or things like that, or even I have to say, even with Vox Pro, or production things, I had a guy who, he really did. That's all he used was Cool Edit. And we ended up moving to Adobe Audition, building wide. And, it was not very pleasant at first, but once he got used to it, he loved it and realized he liked it a whole lot better than Cool Edit. He just never was in a position to have to try it. So, sometimes you have to look at it that way too. It's a combination of, what works for them, but sometimes it does kind of come down to, you have to have some standards sometimes, and sometimes it's gonna, it's gonna make some people unhappy, but you just try to do the best to make it easy for them, and got them some training on it and things like that, and it turns out, worked out really, really well. But yeah.
I'm wondering another topic, because this happens no matter if it's AOIP or transmitters or phone systems or business inventory and billing software, whatever. How much is it really worthwhile to have consistency across a group owner's stations versus how much is it okay to let an individual station be different because that's what they like?
I was literally, as you guys were just discussing, I was going to jump in and mention that, because I feel like standardization with a particular brand of hardware, especially in your consoles and your automation, I feel like more so than anything else is really beneficial, especially when you've got talent that floats sometimes from market to market. You might have talent from one market fly in and help do some fundraising or some other type of shows in another market, and for them to be able to walk in and go, yep, everything feels familiar, I know how to work this, is a huge thing. And secondly, from an engineering perspective, to know how to remote in and support all those different markets, because it's all the same gear It's all set up very similarly. It's structured very similarly. So it is very beneficial from a corporate perspective to do that standardization, because it just makes it easier to support and easier for your talent.
Absolutely. And in my case, where I've got 22 stations across the state, I have a central location where I have a storage facility where I store spares. Well, I'm not going to be able to afford having spare nodes for each building, but I can afford to have a couple of spare nodes in storage for
Yep.
whatever station needs it. And that's why we've, tried to standardize on transmitters and some things like that where there's parts sharing going on. But then there are some individual things. Processing is one of them. Some of the cases is microphones. Some people, some markets, some stations, they want this kind of microphone, other stations, they want that. And I'm all for, being flexible with those tools. But there are some things where it makes a lot more sense to standardize.
Yep, I agree.
No mic.
Of course, I wasn't even on the screen. I was getting ready to go do another commercial. But I like for Matt, when we come back, I'd like for Matt to be ready to talk about. I'm not aware of what specific things there are to configure in switches. And Matt, you mentioned that in your case, you just got different switches, and I'm curious about why that would be. Me working for Telos Alliance and for Axia, a lot of times people will say, hey, well, we've got some Wheatstone and it's doing this, and we want to add a Telos phone system that's also going to be audio over IP. It's going to be AES67 talking to the Wheatstone. And if they have a Wheatstone system running, well, whatever switch they have running that successfully is probably going to work just fine for the AES67 coming out of a Telos VX system. So usually we don't, have much to complain about or talk about with the switch if they're using some other brand. So I'd be curious to know, maybe what about what works or what doesn't work or what may need a real heads up. I was curious about that. And coming up also in the show, we're going to talk about stations that may put in a new audio console that's capable of a lot of stuff, and yet the engineer may minimally configure it just to the point that it works when it could be a whole lot better. I've run across that a few times, and that's a little disappointing that users are kind of struggling with a minimally set up audio console when it could do some really convenient things. In other words, we haven't yet learned, not everyone's learned how to make them sing and dance and walk and talk. Our show This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you in part by our friends at Broadcast Bionics. They have a system called Camera One that integrates great with AOIP systems. They talk about integrating with Axia because it certainly does. And so let's hear about Bionics Camera One. We'll be right back.
Camera One from Broadcast Bionics. Designed to bring video to your audio content. Visualizing radio and podcasts for social media. Camera One can automatically create, capture and brand professionally switched video for live streaming or upload, making your production shareable. Control and configure using a web browser on any device. Camera One is available as a 4-camera or 8-camera system using the Blackmagic A10 Mini range, including the A10 Mini Extreme. You can use cameras to suit your studio and your budget. You'll need one camera for a studio wide shot and usually one camera per microphone. A standard multi-channel sound card or IP driver monitors audio from each studio microphone, and we work natively with Axia systems. Ideally, this will be a post-fader feed from each mic, although you can use pre-fade audio or a mic split if that's all you have available. These audio levels are used to intelligently switch the video feed when each contributor is talking. You can also group microphones together into one shot and use the audio from a mixer's aux bus. You can use Camera One's auto switch feature, or disable it and switch using the on-screen buttons or the buttons on the A10. Recordings can automatically start when you tell the system you're on the air. This on-air indication can be linked to your studio's red lights via IP or an Avantec Adam GPIO interface. You can quickly browse all the videos that have been automatically created during your broadcast, download them and post. Camera One is a user-installable system. You'll need a good spec Windows 10 PC, i7 with plenty of storage and 16 GB of RAM. It's better if this machine isn't used for anything else. Remember, you can control the software in a web browser on another device on your network. Camera One, a thrifty way of creating scroll-stopping video from your show or podcast from Broadcast Bionics.
These guys are so clever. Oh my goodness. Got to see them at the NAB show, and you can see them anytime. Go to their website at bionics.co.uk or bionic.radio. Broadcast Bionics. Hey, they make software that works with phone systems to do call screening. They make Camera One. They make Caller One, which is a phone system in and of itself. They make and Studio One, which really helps your talent have what they need right in front of them right there and catch those clips for social media. Check it out from Broadcast Bionics. All right, we're talking to Chris Tarr is here, and Matt Levin is here to talk about one of our topics, and that's moving from one AOIP brand or system. The technologies are fairly similar, not quite identical, but very close, from moving from one to another, maybe by standardizing or different engineer, different management, whatever. So Matt, we were getting ready to talk about the specifics of maybe Ethernet switches. What's been your experience there? You said you had to swap some out.
Well, it wasn't required, but it was one of those things where as we were, because this was a 5 studio setup, so as we were doing the 3 middle studios, we kept the end air studios online with the old system. So to have both systems running in parallel but not interfering, we just put in 2 more Cisco switches and program them all up for Livewire. And typically I like to do 2 Cisco switches in a stack. So if you ever have one go down, you've still got the other switch and it's configured the same way. And if you, for some reason, need to spread things across even, you can put some studios on one switch and some on the other. So if you have one go down, you don't lose the whole facility. So that's kind of my standard mode of operation. So we just went ahead and did that and brought all the new stuff up on that new set of switches.
Gotcha. When you configure a Cisco switch, and Cisco is kind of the industry standard for this because it seems like they were early on, 15 years ago, they were making switches that met all the requirements. At least my experience at Axia was that some other brands of switches said they had this protocol, that protocol, but they didn't work properly or well enough, or at least in our experience, they didn't. What's been is Cisco your go-to switch for AOIP?
Yes, because a couple reasons. Long before AOIP came around, Cisco has been established as kind of like the standard for reliable switches. You just don't have problems with them. They'll run forever. In fact, lots of people buy them used because they'll run for 20 years. And they're really expensive to buy new, but you can pick them up used from all kinds of distributors online. But so long ago, they were established as the switch to buy for reliability. So it was no surprise to me that when AOIP came around, everybody in the industry kind of standardized with Cisco switches. And what's even easier is you can go to Axia's website, get the configuration for your series of switch, literally copy and paste that configuration into a notepad, edit the first little bits where identify as the switch, and in your config lines, just copy and paste it right in. So it makes setting up that Cisco switch really easy for the Axia stuff specifically.
I've been told, and because I've been trying out these less expensive Cisco switches for Axia AOIP installations. That's this CBS 350 series. It's available in a number of different port configurations, 8 ports up to, I guess, 48 ports, and they're a lot less expensive. And we have instructions for them. We Telos Alliance on the support page exactly step by step graphically how to set those up, and it's graphical instead of just all command line. One thing that people have warned me about, and I haven't experienced it yet myself, the expensive switches, like the 2960s and the 3750s and on up from there, the expensive switches, you could make command line updates and configuration changes and not have to reboot the switch, and it wouldn't hiccup. It would just take your instruction and run with it. You got to remember to save it. Whereas the less expensive switches, sometimes you make an update, it's going to go, okay, I'm going to stop everybody while I fix this, and then restart everybody. Is that true?
I'll be honest, Kirk, I've not tried the less expensive switches because the used market for the Cisco 2960s, the CX, 2960X, 2960S, they're so affordable to buy secondhand at this point. If budget's a concern, I just pick up the used Cisco switches. I know they work. They're going to be reliable.
We buy a lot of catalysts just off lease. So I've got,
Yep.
really nice catalyst with 2 power supplies, fans. I paid $100 for it.
Right.
Wow.
That's just it. That exactly.
And I just,
you can
I
pick up,
bought like 7 of them. And I
yeah.
that's all I use now for Axia. In fact, I've started
Yep.
putting them out
Yeah.
the transmitter sites because of the redundant supplies. There's really no reason. I mean, those things will last forever. There's no reason not to do that.
Exactly. And they're so cheap to buy off lease. And that's why, to me, it doesn't even make sense to look at those less expensive switches when you can go buy the nice Catalyst switches used off lease for the same amount of money. They're just used. So are you okay buying used gear? And as long as you're not afraid of command line programming, which, again, when Telos gives you all the commands you need, you just got to know how to put them in.
Right.
And it's not hard to do.
You make really good points.
Yeah, because we were having an issue where we were using a Cisco SG300, and it was great up until a point, and then we finally got so loaded that I couldn't keep sync locked, and we were getting some issues, and so we put in this catalyst, and it's funny, before as we were putting it in, we hadn't programmed it yet, and you could tell it was not happy, and then the minute we put the command line instructions in from the Telos Alliance site, last command goes in, and boom. Thing was just smooth, and we've had no problems with it. So, yeah, I mean, for $100, we solved all of our problems.
Yeah, and so it's funny. I used to not bother with PoE, but with the X nodes now that actually power themselves off of PoE ports. I was showing somebody that the other day, and they're like, they didn't know that, and they're like, "How come the light's yellow instead of green?" I'm like, "Because it's getting power from the switch and from the outlet." They're like, "No way!"
Right.
So funny.
Yeah, I mean, that's another benefit. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think there's people out there that still don't know that X nodes can be powered from PoE. So now buy a PoE. When you buy those switches, buy a PoE version because they're, again, used off lease. They're not that expensive.
Yeah.
So now you've got redundant power to all your X nodes.
Yep.
So what drove my decision to try some of the newer, cheaper ones, the CBS series, was I've been a big believer in buying the off lease ones too. I've bought a ton of them. In fact, one of them that I bought had a big sticker on the top. I've told this before, that says "Property of the Pennsylvania State Department of Corrections." Now I don't know if this thing was hot or not, but yeah. Anyway, it had done some time. But I had bought a couple of Cisco switches off lease used, and they were actually in pretty bad shape, and stuff didn't work. And I bought a couple other power supplies and stuff. And in the end, I got a little frustrated and couldn't make it work. And I said, I'm just going to pay the $400 to $700 for the new, cheaper version. But I understand the caveats there, and our own tech support guys at Telos will tell you, hey, there's caveats, like I mentioned before. But no, you make great points here.
And the other thing, Kirk, is for example, we just we've bought a couple and had one bad, but even if, let's say, we buy 3 of them for $300, even if one of them's bad, that's still way better deal than what you're going to get new.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So most of my stations have 2 older Cisco switches. One is populated. They're both programmed identically, and I haven't gone to the trouble of connecting the 2. But I tell the general manager, look, if we determine that dies, you just be prepared to plug in the other one and move all the cables, over to the other one. If it's in port number 22, move it to port number 22, because they're programmed identically, and that's been okay for us.
And I used to do that approach, but then when I figured out how easy it was to stack them, and again, when you buy the off-lease switches, you can buy the stack modules and cables as well, and it's so easy to do that now that that makes it even easier. And what's even cooler about doing the stacking approach as opposed to 2 separate switches is, again, you can spread your studios. So you buy enough ports on each given switch to run the whole facility, but you spread your load. You'll put some studios and some of your TOC nodes that kind of go with those stations on one switch, and put some other studios and some nodes that go with those studios on the other switch. And then if one goes down, you don't lose the whole facility. So you can still somewhat keep things on the air until somebody can move the rest of those cables over.
One thing that we always used to teach about, people would want redundancy. When they first started looking at AOIP, one of the first complaints was, well, everything depends on one switch here. Okay, it doesn't have to be that way because they can be stacked just exactly as you said. Well, everything depends upon this node putting out audio into my processor, whether it's an Orban, an Omni, or whatever. And we would point out, well, what do you do now for redundancy? Well, we have 2 processors, and we can put either one into our chain. Okay, well, you could have 2 processors and feed each one from a different X node, and each of those X nodes connected to a different switch in the stacked switches. So, I mean, how far back do you want to go with your redundancy? You can absolutely do this, and it doesn't have to be n times 2. You know, it doesn't have to be your whole facility times 2. You can pick the strategic things that need 2 paths to them. You can even take a modern audio processor that might have an analog input and an AES input, and feed the analog input with an analog node. Again, no matter what brand, if it's Wheatstone or Axia, and you can feed the AES input with an AES node output from from another.
Here's the thing
switch.
now is here's the thing now is we've got because I'm using fiber to do a lot of STLs. What we do just to be really, really safe is at our transmitter sites, we put in a backup playout system that is mirrored with the studio one. Well, we use Omni 11s that have live wire inputs in them. So we go live wire right from the playout machine at the studio, at the transmitter into the processor. So it's got a failover. So if the audio stops coming from the studio, the playout machine at the transmitter site just takes over. It fails over to the live wire input, and there's audio. So yeah, I mean, there are 8 million ways to do, redundancy that way.
Yeah.
We do the exact same thing. I've got backup playout machines for wide orbit at 3 of our transmitter sites. So if it loses internet connectivity, it's a secondary input on the processor. It just switches over and keeps right on going.
Yep.
Wow.
And I use a Max Connect to get into it.
Yep.
There you go.
That's the other thing. That's the other thing. Now keep that in mind because, I learned that I almost am embarrassed to admit I learned that the hard way because if the internet goes down, you can't check on your playout machine at the transmitter site. So I needed a different path to get in to look at the transmitter if the fiber went out or whatever. So I have Max Connects at these sites so that I can then log in and troubleshoot from that end as well as the other end.
It's interesting over time, what we find out what's reliable and maybe what's not so reliable. I've got one studio and transmitter site. It's off in the hinterland in Mississippi. I mean, it is out there, and we can kind of pretty much get T-Mobile 5G service. So we've got their commercial grade, supposedly, service out there, the little white Inseego box. We also have a wireless ISP that feeds it too, but it's been terribly unreliable. And so we cannot be on that all the time. It's also much slower than the 5G from T-Mobile. Well, I want to be able to troubleshoot the T-Mobile before I ask the general manager there, who is not technical at all, to get us switched over to the wireless ISP. So you know what I did? Normally we're on the T-Mobile, and the T-Mobile it's a metal building. It's one of those cheap metal buildings, but it's got some windows. We put the Inseego T-Mobile 5G box in the window in an unused studio, and then we ran a cable back to the router. So it's sitting there. Then the only thing that is running on the wireless ISP's network is a Wise webcam, and it's pointed at the T-Mobile box, so I can use the somewhat unreliable wireless ISP to check on the color of the indicator light, the one indicator light on the T-Mobile box, and I can call the GM and say, "Yes, I see that your internet's out; it's not responding." And I can see using the camera on the other system that your light there is yellow. When you get in the station in the morning, can you just reboot that thing and see if that fixes it? And
you gotta get yourself a firewall that has dual WANs on it that'll fail over.
Yes,
actually, I've got a MikroTik that can do that, and I just ain't figured out how to do it yet because every video on the internet tells you a different way, and they all skip seven steps.
I use Sonic walls, and it's great for that because I've got 2 different sites that have dual ISPs coming in because of redundancy or whatever. And I used to be able to, I would used to just log in and switch ports or whatever. But not only can I in fact, in my data center, not only do I do dual WANs, but I have, dual redundant Sonic walls. So
Yep, me too.
Did I lose you guys? Oh, there we go. I'm frozen. Can you hear me?
We can still hear you.
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully my video comes back in a minute here. But I use the dual sonic walls with the redundancy built in, so it'll actually switch firewalls if one of them dies. So it's
I have the
great because
same
you don't have to
thing.
deal with anything. Yeah, the high
Yep,
availability option.
Yep. I have HA on my Sonic walls, and then I've got my two ISPs coming in, 2 firewalls, and then at all my sites, I've got a single firewall with a wired connection and a 4G or 5G connection, and then I keep a spare at the studio for the transmitter sites because they're all the same model. Talking about that standardization again, I
Yep.
keep a spare on the shelf in case lightning hits one of them and blows one of them up. I can get it replaced pretty quickly.
Yeah, I keep
So
an extra. I keep an extra Max Connect and an extra Sonic wall.
And to me, Sonic Wall is a great example of what we've been talking about with changing AOIP standards or one brand to another, or even Cool Edit Pro. And I don't want to go to Adobe Audition, even though all my friends say I'll like it better, because of a couple of poor experiences I've had with Sonic Wall, literally 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago. And so it's like my brain doesn't want to learn about Sonic Wall because I know how much I didn't like it 20 years ago. And that's wrong. That's a wrong attitude.
I was the same.
I
was the same way because I used a Sonic Wall 15 years ago and I hated it. But I always tell my coworker Dave this all the time because he'll go, "Well, I thought you liked this." Like, well, I'm never married, and I think this is important for engineers. I'm never married to something so tightly that I'm not willing to look at other options, even revisit options that I didn't like before, because I don't want to close myself out from something that might actually be very valuable to us. And Sonic Wall is a great example of that. I hated them, and then I started to use them again now, and I'm like, boy, these things are really, once you learn them, are really great. And I've started to I put them in everywhere, and same thing. I have a couple of new ones, but most of them I've just bought, off lease or used. And these things just run and run and run and run. And, I've been able to connect all my sites together, and, they're great. But I'm with you. I mean, I tried one years ago and hated it, but I just try to keep an open mind about
it. Yeah.
It's funny you talk about.
Go
ahead.
Go ahead, Matt. Finish your thought.
Oh, I should say, I like what you said about not being married. I've kind of, as I've matured and gotten older, I used to be really hard set about certain brands. No, we only use this. But I've actually, in doing consulting and being at other stations and talking to other engineers and seeing other things that work, what works and what doesn't for various different people, I've actually, been much more willing to try different things over the last several years. We've even experimented with some Ubiquity stuff recently as far as networking goes. So I used to absolutely hate the other O brand of processors, and I've actually got some stations I consult for that love them. And I'm like, okay, well, you know what? They're working for you. They sound good for your station and your format, so we're just going to keep rolling with that. So I'm with you. I've learned that there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Ubiquity is another great example of that. I always would go, I'd never use that for anything, broadcast related. I use them all the time now. And as long as you get the right ones, they're fantastic.
Yes.
And this is what
they have some good stuff and bad stuff, but the good stuff's good stuff.
Maybe we ought to have a show where we just go through a list of I've had good experience with this model, this model, this model.
No, Kirk, I don't think you want me to do that because I've had some things that you're familiar with that I would not have had great experiences with. So
yeah, I understand. Oh, I get it. I got it.
I don't want to take off any sponsors or anything.
Speaking of sponsors, what a great segue. Let's run into a sponsor. Broadcasters General Store is a fantastic place to get stuff, and one of the stuffs you can get is something new from Innovonics. New in that it's probably still less than a year old, and that is the Innovonics triple tuner, the model 677. Let's take a look at the 677 model. It is just amazing. It's now shipping. The 677 triple tuner is an EAS, or designed for EAS. You can use it for other stuff. It's an EAS monitor receiver in a compact half rack package. It's got 3 built-in discrete frequency agile receivers, and each one of these can be AM, FM, or NOAA weather radio. So you can have 3 AMs, you can have 3 FMs, or NOAA, whatever. it's mix and match in terms of the frequency coverage. Each receiver has a balanced mono XLR output to serve as your EAS monitor or an off-air monitor if mono is fine for you. It has an easy front panel setup with a jog wheel menu navigation, like so many Inovonics products. Very well designed, easy to see, easy to program. On the back panel, it's got 6 rear panel GPOs that can be user assigned to alarm functions. And it has a dynamic web interface that gives you control and monitoring remotely via any web-enabled device. In addition, remote listening by web stream. And Inovonics is so good at this. I use this all the time on some receivers at my stations to make sure things are on the air. So you can also program it to send emails, SMS messages, and Chris Tard makes his socks roll up and down. SNMP is fully supported in the Inovonics Model 677. Check this thing out. It's really good. I've talked to Inovonics about this. By the way, it was a best of show for 2024 from Radio World. So wow, good for them. A well-deserved award. And like everything from Inovonics, it is well manufactured, well designed, well made, and it performs. So check this thing out. You can get it at Broadcasters General Store. BGS.cc is the website. And at BGS, as I always tell you, they got sharp pencils and friendly voices and great attitudes. And they've got an ordering system that they have literally custom built from the ground up over the last 20 plus years. They can take your order quickly, get you the best price quickly, and in most cases, they can tell you about availability and give you your shipping options. Maybe they have it in stock there. Maybe they know exactly how long the lead time is to have it drop shipped. Maybe it's immediate. Maybe it's 2 weeks. Maybe it's 3 days. Maybe it's 6 months, but they will tell you because they're really good at this and they keep up with it. Hey, I work for Telos Alliance. We're one of the vendors that BGS represents. And they're in touch with us all the time about, what products are available immediately, what are taking a bit longer. And of course, they're in on all the promotions that we do too. Check these guys out, bgs.cc. Thanks a lot for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. Wow, so much to talk about. Matt Levin is our guest. Chris Tarr is along. And I wanted to get on this topic of having an audio console, especially if you've always used just a hardware console, an analog or even a digital hardware console where it doesn't have a web interface. It's just, it's a console. You give it inputs, you punch things up, you give it outputs. If there's, left, right, pan control, it's a knob on the front. In other words, there's nothing hidden underneath. But nowadays, all these consoles that use AOIP, they all have stuff under the hood that you need to program. And, some come, somewhat the default programming will do fine for lots of things. But I've been to a couple stations now where the engineer put a console in, an Axia console, and it was very minimally programmed. And so it wouldn't do all the cool features. It wasn't programmed to do the cool features that my employer advertises because the engineer didn't know to do those things. Now, everybody can learn. I don't fault the engineer, but hey, let's get together and learn what we can do. Let's talk about this thing about the default and then what are some of the most valuable things that you can program. And Matt, you told us earlier that you always put in at least 2 profiles on audio consoles when you install them. You have an on-air profile and a voice tracking profile, and some you also have a production profile. Talk to me about what these different functions are and what needs to be programmed. What makes up a voice tracking profile that's different from an on-air profile?
The biggest thing is your microphone sources and some of your other sources. So obviously your stack playout, your main playout for your automation is always going to stay locked in that bus 1 for program. And in some cases, you can even lock that on button on where they can't turn it off. But a lot of the rest of your sources, you're going to sometimes use as on air. But in voice track mode, you want those in a different bus to record and not go to air. So stuff like, again, I'm using White Orbit as the example here, but, like your heads and tails for voice tracking, you're going to want to be able to hear in your ears, or if you're going to use a hotkey for a bed while you're voice tracking, you want those in those record buses, but not on the air. So rather than have to tell a jock, oh, hey, by the way, when you want to voice track, go and take all these sources out of bus 1 so you don't accidentally put them on the air. Just make a profile for it. You literally, and it's so easy. I'll build the on-air profile, I'll load it, I'll go to the back end of the IQ console, do a capture, so it's got everything already mapped just the way I had it, and all I have to do is go and unassign bus 1 to everything but that automation stack. That's it, and then I resave it as a show called VT. So that's on the IQ boards. And again, a production mode for so let's say you have a studio that's a backup air studio, but most of the time it's in production. So you can build 3 profiles for that one. You've got an emergency backup air, a backup VT, but then the production profile, which is where it's going to be at most of the time, that doesn't even have the stack in there. It's just the sources they need for production in that bus 2, which is typically your record bus. So that's on the IQ consoles. Now on the Element, Quasar, Fusion consoles, you can get way more creative because you have an unlimited number of shows. Remember, the IQ only gives you 4 shows. But with the other consoles, you get lots of, unlimited amount of show profiles. So in those cases, I'll actually build a profile for every DJ, and you can get into custom EQ curves for their microphones even. So, and that's something I do a lot of on the higher end Axia consoles. So all different things you can do depending upon the console that you're putting in.
Yeah, and hey, those are all good ideas. I want to hear what Chris does at his stations. One thing I would note, it's true that the IQ console is limited to just 4 profiles, but you can take a given source input and define it as many different ways as you want. Maybe there's a limit. So you could take your host mic input and you could define it with an EQ curve for John and a different EQ curve and settings for Mary and a different EQ curve for Billy. And although by profile, you couldn't bring them up by punching one profile, you can bring the on-air profile and then go to that fader that's got, John's mic and go hit the button and select Mary, if it's Mary's shift. So you can define a source lots of different ways. Am I wrong? Or am I missing something there?
No, that's not something I've specifically done, but you could absolutely do that. Just create a new, it's just a different source profile. It uses the same Livewire input, but you're just creating a different source profile with different settings. So that's something super easy. It's just not something I've done. I've not had a need to do.
Yeah, and usually I set up mic processing and everybody's happy with it. Not because I'm good, just if I set it up for me, everybody else, that's fine. I've had a couple people want their own, but that's for the most part. But this notion of using the same input, the same physical source, and defining it different ways came up when they had an ISDN codec at a station, and I defined it such that it was part of the talk around bus. So when they were playing music or playing spots, and they had the mic faders were off and the ISDN fader was off, they could all talk around and hear each other hands free. This kind of started when the PR&E consoles, but it carried over into the design of even the first Axia consoles. And I did that, and so they didn't have to push a talk back button to talk to the traffic lady in the morning. And I walked in the next morning and I said, well, how's the console? Do you guys like it? Yeah, we like it. I said, oh, there's one problem. Yeah, what's that? Well, the traffic lady. I said, yeah, isn't that great? You can just talk to her. I said, yeah, we don't want that. Sometimes we say bad things about her, and we don't want, we want to push the button that says talk back in order for her to hear what we're saying.
Whoops.
And I said, but you guys do use the ISDN for remotes with your own jocks, because I've heard them on the air. They said, oh, yeah. I said, well, how about we just define it as traffic, and you have to push the talkback button to talk to traffic. But the same ISDN codec, when it just says ISDN as the source, it works with this cool talk around thing. They said, yeah, that'll be fine. That'd be easy. So, man, that drilled into my head. You can take a source and define it to behave different ways in the terms of the logic. So,
yep.
Chris, how about you? How are you helping people out with different profiles?
Very much the same with profiles and locking things out. Like, I know you do it. It didn't come up, is you can lock microphones from not going into certain buses either. So in a voice track profile, you can lock, your play stack on and then in one, and then you can also prevent your microphone from going into bus 1. So I do the same thing with profiles with that. Now, as for not using everything that it can do, there is I kind of argue with that a little bit, in that, you can really get down a rabbit hole of doing all the things with your console. And a lot of that, I worked with somebody that was very new, the ins and outs of Axia. Just he actually did support there and everything, and great guy, good friend of mine. But he would he would go overboard. Oh, you could do this and this and this and this and this, and it got so complicated that people, the people on the air were just like, yeah, we can do that, but why? I mean, that's neat, but why are we doing that? So,
Yeah.
I tend to start with the stock configuration with a couple of profiles, but then, I take some time to learn what their workflows are. And if there's something that I can do that makes that easier, one of the things early on that we did was tie in the on-air lights. So when you hit record on Vox Pro, it triggered the on-air lights, so people weren't walking in when they were recording calls. So, that's the way I kind of treated it was, instead of telling them what all it can do, because, Steve Jobs once famously said, people don't know what they want until you give it to it. So, I kind of just watch their workflow and ask them, hey, if we were able to do this, or ask them, what would make this easier for you? Is there something that we could do with this equipment to improve the workflow? Then we'll look into it. But I found that it's really easy to go, oh man, this can do this and this and this. So let's set it all up. And then everybody gets confused by it or never uses it, or it just makes it more complicated than it needs to be.
Very true words. My goodness.
It all goes back to that customer service thing I was talking about earlier. We're in the job of making it easier for the talent. So even to do these things, as we're setting up these profiles and doing those things Chris was just talking about and observing their workflows, that is so crucial to what we do. We have to know how they do their jobs and what their workflows are to make things the easiest we can for them as the talent and operators of this equipment.
And we have to identify those pain points. What is it that's preventing you from operating, at your best? What's preventing you from being as creative as you can possibly be? Where is technology getting into your way? How can we help? Rather than having you bend towards the technology we have, how can we make the technology work for you? And that's where these tools then become really important. Because it's not the fact that you can do all of those things. I mean, it is, but it's not, you don't turn all the switches on at once. Then you go, hey, you know what? What if I were able to make this do that? Would that help? And then, oh yeah, that'd be great. The on-air light, very simple thing in Vox Pro, but they were getting tired of people walking in the door. So I was able to say, what if we could do that? Would that help? Oh, absolutely. That'd be great. And, we went on to later on put in a button bar, just because of the lights in our one of our Element consoles that flashed when a station was off. Would that help? So those are things that are really easy to do, and what we should be doing is engineers.
Yep.
Well, maybe Chris froze. Oh, what, Chris? You froze, but it was a great pose. We could have saved that.
It was great.
Hey, tell you what, I'm gonna push and stretch this. Tell you what, let's do our final ad. When we come back, I do want to spend just a couple of minutes before we do a tip of the week on this notion of PC-based FM audio processing, because Matt's got a lot of experience with that. And I've got a little bit of experience with that. My employer makes a couple products for that, but so do other people. So we're going to talk about that when we come back. Maybe it's how to make that reliable, or how to, how do we be comfortable with this? Because a lot of folks would not be comfortable. I'm not going to put my FM signal through a PC. So, and I get that. They said the same thing about audio over IP. I'm not going to put my audio on a computer network. The show This Week in Radio Tech with Matt Levin and Chris Tarr. It's brought to you in part by Angry Audio. And Chris Tarr, man, he knows all about Angry Audio and some of their audio processing and mic processing. And I never know what Chris is going to talk about. So, Chris, tell us what's on your heart about Angry Audio.
Oh, what's on my heart is the Rave console. We've been talking about audio over IP in the past hour, and it's fantastic. Audio over IP is great, but it's not the solution for everything. Sometimes, plain old analog console is what you want to get, but you don't have to give up the features because you're giving up audio over IP. These audio over IP consoles are spectacular. They look great. They're easy to use. But you don't have to give up on that if you're looking for an analog version. The Angry Audio almost went the other way there. The Angry Audio Rave console checks a lot of boxes. It's got 2 output mix buses. It does mix minus. It's got on-air indicators, monitor, talkback, all kinds of things. A high-power headphone amplifier, monitor section, mix minus outputs. You name it, and it's got it. And it's very affordable, too. Everything on the back, Studio Hub, and of course, it's got that Angry Audio that they're famous for at Angry Audio with Catfish and their designs. Very RF hardened. The audio circuitry sounds fantastic, super clean. Mic preamps are amazing. And again, this has all of the features that you're going to find in the big boy consoles. It's got tallies, it's got remote starts. You name it, you can get it from here, and it's super affordable. You'd be surprised. Are you a podcaster? You could probably pick one of these up very affordably for podcasting, even. So, I mean, it's built solid. It's got machined aluminum with laser etched markings. You're not going to be rubbing off all the printing on the silk screening or anything. It's got the LED lights on it that are very rugged. You can switch between mics and line inputs on I think the first 4 buses. Just fantastic work. And it's affordable. In fact, you'll be surprised what you're going to get, the kind of value you get from one of these consoles compared to the competitors, because it blows everything else out of the water at the price point. And be looking, because I have a feeling, now don't quote me on this, I have a feeling there's going to be a podcasting solution coming up soon that includes this. I believe maybe a mic processor, that sort of thing altogether. Angry Audio, when you have problems, don't get angry, get Angry Audio. They're the guys who can help you out. Check out your favorite broadcast vendor. They're going to have all the products you need for anything. They've got the gadgets, the gizmos, they've got the Rave consoles, they've got processors, all of those little things that, you just wish you had around to make your life easier. You can get them. angryaudio.com. Check them out today.
And remember, the Rave console is personally endorsed by Chris Tarr because they're both ruggedly handsome.
They are, absolutely. And laser etched.
And laser etched. All right. Thank you very much. And thanks to Angry Audio. Another sponsor is Max Connect. We've talked for years about Max Connect Wireless, and Josh Bone has expanded this company to do all kinds of things. And our guest might know something about that. Matt, I understand, you and Josh have done some projects together. What are some of the things that Max Connect does that engineers like me, like Chris, ought to know about?
Well, first and foremost, the newly formed MK Technical Services. That's the new branding for the engineering portion of the company, now known as Triple Helix. And I've been a part of that group for quite a while, under 3 different names. But now this is the newest one. I think this is the one we're going to stick with. So I've gotten to do some pretty cool projects with them over the years. Studio installs, console installs, transmitter installs, processing. I mean, anything to do with radio engineering that you don't have the time or resources to take care of, call us up and we can come take care of it for you. We are in the business of solving your problems.
And what I've seen, and a lot of engineers wouldn't think this right away, but as an engineering firm that will come in and do a project and do it well, you're not in the business of showing the local engineer how to do it right. You're in the business of making the local engineer look good and helping the station work like the ownership wants it to. I've hired engineers to come in and do things. I've hired Mike Patton, Russ Lafferty, and others to come in and do a specific project. And I'm delighted that they're available to do something that I was too busy to do, or maybe I didn't have the right tools to do. And that's where MK, what are they calling it? MK what?
MK Technical Services.
MK Technical. I need to write that down. MK Technical. I'll send them the bill too.
And yes, you're right. So by no means are we going to come in and say, oh, no, you're doing this all wrong. So, one of the first things we're going to do is sit down and discuss the project with you and or ownership or management. What do you want from us? What is your expectations? What do you want to be involved in? What do you not want to be involved in? How do you want us to do this so that it's easier for you to maintain down the road? Because look, we know we're coming in to do a project, but the station engineer is the one that's got to maintain it after we're done with it. So it doesn't do us any good to just do it our way and not consult and make sure that it's going to be the right way for the other engineer to maintain long term. So we're going to make sure that it's how they want it and they can maintain it after we're done.
Speaking of
Cool.
Mike, by
That
the
is-
way,
Mhm.
speaking of Mike Patton, he's at one of my sites today, working on
Really?
putting a new transmitter. Yeah, we've got a transmitter, actually a big project. We have 2 transmitters that are moving into this building, 2 older ones that we have that we're moving from another site. And he just happened to be in town for this week and next week and said, "Hey, anything going on that I can help you with?" Like, as a matter of fact, I have these 2 transmitters that need to be installed. If you want to swing by and take care of that while you're here. So he's actually at one of my sites today working on it.
So check out Max Connect, all the services they offer, including on-site engineering and projects from Max Connect. We'll have the link is in the show notes. Okay, hey, we just got a couple minutes left, and I want to get this get a little. We're gonna have to do a whole show on this at some point. But Matt, I became familiar with companies like with products like Breakaway One and Stereo Tool, and which is now sold under the Timeo moniker. Of course, there's Omnia SST. So the company I work for has had this software FM processor offering for a while. And Telos Alliance just announced the Forza FM processor, and that runs a little bit differently. It doesn't run in Windows. It runs as a Docker container on a Linux machine. So, Matt, what are some of your thoughts on FM processing done on a PC type platform or a server platform? And where do you expect this technology or this technique to go in the next few years?
Well, I think, obviously Omnia coming out with the Forza FM on a Docker container only further confirms what we've been saying for a while, is that there's really no reason you can't run your FM processor on a hardened computer. And by a hardened computer, I mean not something off the shelf, at Best Buy that's a gaming computer. It needs to be a well-built, in my opinion, server-grade computer. I typically, when I do these for people, it needs to be a Xeon platform with, server-class hardware inside of it and, server-class storage, dual power supply, because they're designed to run 24/7. Where your off-the-shelf gaming computer from Best Buy is not. It's designed to be turned on and run for 4 to 6 hours a day and then turned off. It's not meant to stay on all the time. So you've just got to know that going in, and obviously the computer's part of the equation. Then there's the software. Breakaway One, Omnia SST, and the Windows version of Stereo Tool can run on Windows, but then there's Forza FM that runs in a container, and then there's Stereo Tool that also runs in Linux. So once you've decided which, you've got your computer and you've got your software, now you got to pick an audio interface. I'm not sure what Omnia has coming out as far as interfaces go for Forza, but I know that with the other ones we mentioned, there's a couple of different options. Audio Science, Marion, both make cards that work for that. There's a new card coming from Max Connect and Angry Audio, partnered together to make the U192, which is a USB audio interface that will have analog and AES in and out, as well as 2 composite outputs right on the box. So it is purpose built for this application for FM processing at a tower site with a computer. So for the first time ever, we're actually going to have a USB audio interface that is purpose built for FM. The rest of these cards that we've all used all these years have been cards that were tested and could be made flat to 60 kilohertz and didn't have any tilt. And you could use it for FM. That wasn't really their original intended purposes. It just happens to serve that purpose. So
Right.
Our options are growing for that avenue, and it's only going to continue to grow, I feel like. So it's kind of, it's a great way to still get really powerful processing, but not spend quite so much money on that hardware that you get from a manufacturer. So if you're on a constrained budget, it's an easy way to get good quality audio and not spend quite as much money.
And for those who object to, well, I wouldn't put my audio on a Windows computer. Your automation system's on a Windows computer, and probably some other things. And there are techniques to. I've got Windows computers that have literally been running for years. If they've been brought down, they've been brought down by me to do an update because, gee, it's been a year and a half since we did a Windows update. Let's do that. So ahead.
We're talking about, our automation playouts, backup systems on transmitter sites earlier.
Yeah.
That's actually, I use those same machines. So I buy server grade hardware to run backup playout systems at those tower sites. And on those same machines, I've got the processing software running as well, and just with its own sound cards. In that machine are 2 sound cards, one for the automation, one for the processing. So, it's already spec'd out for that exact thing.
Chris, we just got a minute. Any final thoughts on that topic, PC-based processing?
No, I use it. I actually use Stereo Tool with streaming, so I'm familiar with it. I'm just now starting to do some tests with running it live for FM processing, and we'll see. We'll see where that goes. But I agree, it's going to be the future.
Yeah, I haven't stepped too much in this, but been using Omnia SST for probably 6 years now, and one on a server grade platform, and it just sits there and runs, and it comes out in micro MPX, shows up 40 miles away at the transmitter site, and I'm using an Omnia MPX node to play it out, and it works very well. All right, we got to go. Matt, Levin, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us today.
You're very welcome. Been a pleasure.
Chris Tarr, always appreciate you sharing your expertise as well. It's good to see you too.
Good to be seen.
All right. Well, I guess you better clear out and make room for your daughter to go to sleep down there. Maybe you should just put your office in her bedroom. That'd be more convenient for you.
That's the thing. Kids, you can't live with them and you can't shoot them.
Gosh, okay, you're in trouble. Thank you so very much. Also, big thanks to Suncast for producing today's show. Really appreciate you, Suncast. We'll be back next week with another edition of This Week in Radio Tech.